topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working in Purpose program. Thanks for tuning again this week. Great to have you. This show has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. And my team and I at Gusto Now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant destination workplace. There, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best and can grow into their full potential and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, alisecortez.com. Now, getting into today's program, with us back for a second time is Dr. Raj Sisodia, a founding member of the Conscious Capitalism Movement. He is also a PHEMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico de Monterrey. And he is the co-founder and chairman emeritus of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and president of Awaken, Inc. He has consulted with and taught executive programs for numerous well-known companies. And since 2007, he has spoken over 1,000 times on conscious capitalism and related topics to audiences around the world, including at the White House, the Vatican, and the Vatican. He co-hosts the podcast The Conscious Capitalist with Timothy Henry, and he has published 16 books, including Firms of Endearment and The Healing Organization, which we talked about last time together on air. Today, we're talking about his latest book, Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. He joins us today from Boston. Raj, a hearty welcome back to Working on Purpose.
Thank you, Alise. It's great to be back with you.
Really appreciate you, the human walking the planet, and this latest beautiful book that you brought into the world, Raj. It's beautiful, just almost as beautiful as you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Raj. You know, I really commend you, and I thank you for writing such a beautifully personal narrative. You said that this was your most personal share of all of your books, and I've read a few of your books, and it really is you. And I just want to say thank you for modeling such inclusive leadership, loving conscious leadership by sharing your story so intimately, Raj. I know you know this. You then allow us to be able to see our own. So I want to start on that flavor if we can.
Well, thank you, Alise. Actually, it's the first time I've written at all about myself. All the other books, were coming from an academic perspective where you're supposed to be detached and an observer. But I realized that books that have had the biggest impact on me are the ones where the author does share personally from their own life, and that which is deeply personal is also completely universal, as many readers are discovering. Even though my story is pretty unique in many ways, and my background is quite unusual, and yet there are so many points of connection and commonality that people from diverse backgrounds and cultures are finding in the book.
Mm. I appreciated this, and this is increasingly what I'm seeing in some of the other work that I'm doing inside organizations and in my coaching. But you say this specifically in the front of your book, just a couple of sentences I want to read from the front. But you say, you have written this book to understand, you said, my life in a deeper way so I can live more consciously while helping others do the same. It is about looking back, not with anger, resentment, or regret, but with awe, wonder, and curiosity. It is about making more explicit what has been so far implicit. And you go on. So the point being is that you're really trying to showcase through yourself what you hope to help us see in ourselves. And it works. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I think, when I reached the age of 60, 5 years ago in 2018, which is when this project really had its roots, it was a natural vantage point from which to look back at life, because it's kind of the end of the second act and the beginning of the third act. And hopefully, there's a full act, in front of
Yeah,
us,
right.
age. And it's about making sense. This we go through life and we cannot connect the dots except looking back. But when you do stop and look at your life in that way, it turns out that there are patterns and there are things that you can learn uh, by looking back. And there are other people. I think the ultimate goal of anything like this is to help other people learn some of those lessons or get some of those insights without having to go through some of the pain. Some of that is inevitable. Every life has to go through difficulties and painful experiences and learning. But I think we humans are unique among all species in that we can not only learn from our own experience, which anybody can do, but we can also learn from each other's experience.
Hmm.
I think that is really the intention behind this, especially for my children, but really for everybody. How can you learn something from what I've experienced, and hopefully avoid some of the pain that it took me to acquire some of those lessons.
Indeed. And you did mention, speaking of when you turned 60, you mentioned in the book that was the year 2018, and you talk about having a year of metamorphosis that year. There's a few things that were happening that year that I think it'd be great if you could just showcase what they were and why they were so meaningful.
Yeah, so they didn't just happen. I mean, I consciously chose. So I call it my year of conscious awakening or
Mm-hmm.
metamorphosis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was treating it like any other year up to a point. I knew I was going to turn 60 that June, but I was thick in my next writing project, which was the healing organization. I had done all the research, I had collected all the stories, the interviews, etc. And I had planned a series of writing retreats that summer to get the book finally written, which is how I typically work. I go away for a week or two at a time and have an intensive period of writing. And so I had said no to a number of opportunities that had come up, including going to the Himalayas with the Shakti spiritual journeys. My co author on that book, Shakti Leadership, organizes these journeys. And this one was going to be right around the time of my birthday in Ladakh, which is a region way up in the high Himalayas on the border with Tibet and the seat of the deepest Buddhist wisdom in the world, between Tibetan Buddhism and then the kind of Buddhism that exists there. And so I had said no to that. And there was a silent retreat in July in upstate New York that I had said no to, and other things as well. There was a trip to the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador in August that I had also said, oh, I don't have time for any of this. But I got four women telling me the same thing that year
Yeah.
as I was talking to them about my next project. They all said some version of this, that you're writing a book about healing, but what about your own healing? How can you write a book about healing if you don't work on yourself, on your own healing? And I said, well, I don't have time for that. I've got a book deadline. And they said,
Quintessential Raj.
I know, but I know because I was in that mode, almost of a sense of panicked urgency. I was running from project to project. One book wouldn't even be published yet, and I'm already worried about what's the next thing. And never taking any time off, never being with myself. Really, in a very road to burnout in many ways. And so when I said, well, I've got this book deadline, and they said, no, book deadlines are flexible. And I said, well, I don't think I need any healing. I think I'm okay. And I said, well, no, everybody needs healing. And we know your story a little bit. You definitely need to do that. Take some time off, be in nature, be with yourself. Somebody said, smoke some pot, which I don't do, but, just do all that. So I had the wisdom to listen to those four women, very trusted friends. And I delayed the book by 5 months. And I said yes to all the things I had said no to, including the Himalayas, including Amazon rainforest, including the silent retreat, as well as some healing experiences that a friend of mine in Boston told me, you're writing about healing. I've been going to these healing journeys, these plant journeys, which I didn't know what she was referring to. I honestly thought that she meant that you go there and you eat some potted plants, you eat some organic vegetables or something. So, but I trusted her and I said, okay, sure, let's. I was open to all experiences at that point. And so all of these turned into profound experiences of healing and understanding of self-awareness and understanding my life. And we can talk about each of them if you like, but that was really, and then I worked with a coach for the first time ever at the end of that summer. And that too was profound. So these were all things that gave me such deep insight for the first time into life in general and my life in particular that I think I need to write another book after I
Oh,
get.
you need to keep moving on those books. Don't stop writing these books, Raj. They're too beautiful.
Yeah,
I
it's
agree. Well,
wonderful.
and that's where you talk about, you also describe, so you've been talking about this transformative journey that you went on intentionally. But I was really surprised that you say in your book that you realized that you were unconscious for most of your first 6 decades, which is incredible for someone who has done what you have done and written what you have written.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was conscious in certain dimensions, I suppose I had become, right? I had awakened, the many aspects of our being that need to be awakened. And one part of my being had been awakened through my work, which is the discovery of purpose. Through my research, which came out of my frustration with business as a business professor who really didn't believe in the story of business. I was never inspired and I was never emotionally engaged or moved by the story of business and what I was taught and being asked to teach. And so that unhappiness and latent dissatisfaction led me to ask the question, is there a better way to think about this? As I said, my business education was all about the head and the wallet and never touched my heart and soul. I was
Mhm.
never inspired a single day in my 6 years, my 2 years of MBA, 4 years of PhD. Never inspired and never emotionally touched or moved. And for me, those things matter. I think they matter to all humans, but some of us might matter a little more. And so I was hungry for those things. And in the process of doing the research, when I asked, is there a better way? And I looked for companies that are loved by everybody. I literally had tears in my eyes as I was writing some of the stories of those companies. And that book became Firms of Endearment, and that really changed my life because it connected me to my purpose. I said, "Oh my God, it's possible to do business with love and care, and such deep humanity can exist inside a business." And I was never taught this. I was inspired and I was moved to tears, which is a very rare thing to have tears of joy. So that connected me to my purpose. In that instant, I knew that this is what I've been looking for without even realizing it, that I want to dedicate the rest of my life, my working life, to this, to understanding and then telling this story of business and deepening it. So that connected me to my purpose. It led to the conscious capitalism movement, and it elevated my consciousness in that dimension about work, about business. But I thought that was the end of the journey, but it's not really. That's why the subtitle of the book is The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing.
Mhm.
Because I did not have inner peace. I was quite unhappy in my personal life, and both in terms of my relationship to my father and my marriage and my being as a parent, it was very challenging, all of it, and so in a way, my work became an escape.
Hmm.
Was a way to be away from all of that, and I was literally traveling maybe 80% of the time and speaking all over the world 100 times a year maybe, and I was more comfortable in the airport lounges and in hotel rooms, and I thought I was doing important work, and yeah, it was important for the conscious capitalism movement, but in a sense, I was running away from the rest of my life, and I was not living in integrity overall. There was no alignment between different aspects of my life in that sense. So yeah, there was a lot more to that I needed to do, and I didn't realize it. I just thought
Mm.
this was my life.
Hmm. I do want to spend a little more time after the break talking more in depth about the Firms of Endearment book and what that launched. So I want to get there, but I want to surface this bit here, Raj. It's so incredibly. It hurt my heart when I read this because of all the beauty and love that you've put into the world, and to learn that you realized in writing this book that you had been unhappy virtually your whole life. And I'll just read a couple of these sentences, and I'd ask you to respond to this. But this is incredible. You said, in writing this book, I had the sobering realization that I had been unhappy for as long as I could remember. I had minimized or denied my wounds and traumas to myself. I did not have the courage or ability to face them. Here was too much darkness and my sensitive soul just could not take it. All I aspired to was survival. If I could just make it through the next 15 or 20 years, I would be done with it. I found myself looking at obituaries and at how old people were when they died, wondering how much longer I had to endure. A line I read years ago from the God of Small Things kept resurfacing in my mind. Not old, not young, but viable, diable age. Raj, that is an incredible place to be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was how I felt at the time, because life was hard, and yeah, it was something that I felt I was in survival mode. So even though the work was meaningful and those books mattered to me, but at a personal level, like I said, I didn't have that sense of peace or happiness, and I thought it was not in the cards. I thought, different people have different things in different lifetimes, if you believe that. And for me, in this lifetime, happiness was just not in the cards. So I didn't even um, think that it was attainable. And so that was really something that, starting in 2018, I was able to start to look at more deeply and understand and do something about it.
So grateful for that, Raj, on a number of levels. On that note, let's let our listeners and viewers just take in what we just surfaced there. There's a lot to it. We'll take our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We are on the air with Dr. Raj Sisodia, the author of Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. We've been talking a bit about where this book came from and why he wrote it. After the break, we're going to talk about that birth to purpose that he mentioned earlier when he started working on Forms of Endearment. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As I too am dedicated to a world where people can actually realize their potential and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I also continue to write my own books. So my latest one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand first the lay of today's workforce land, what do they want and need, and then I offer 22 best practices to help create a culture to help them find that and offer that. You can learn more about it at my website, alisecortez.com, or find it on Amazon. If you are just now joining me, my guest is Dr. Raj Sisodia. He's a founding member of the Conscious Capitalism Movement. He is a PHMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico I can't say that. I don't know why. I can speak Spanish, but I can't say that. De Monterrey. And he is the co-founder and Chairman Emeritus of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. and the President of Awaken, Inc. So before I realize we get into more of your journey on how it is that you came to Forms of Endearment and Conscious Capitalism, I want to introduce to our listeners and viewers more of your background that so set the fertile stage for really, I would say, what got catalyzed in your life. So first, talking about your parents, that's where I want to go next. And then I want to talk about where your emotions got stuffed. So let's introduce our listeners and viewers to your parents. They're very dynamic people in your lives. Who were they for you?
Yes. So my father and mother were both grew up in little villages. They came from these farming backgrounds, but actually from a very feudal background. So both my grandfathers were, they call them landlords, but they were really kind of the feudal overlords, I suppose you could say, of those villages. They had huge amounts of land. They had a big house, like a fort on a hill, and dozens of servants and so forth. So a very feudal culture. I've come from the warrior class in India. There's the caste system, which is the Brahmins, and then the warrior caste, and then the others. And so I grew up in a very feudal environment, which was very extremely patriarchal, hyper masculine, almost misogynistic, I would say. I mean, the women were really, in many ways, subjugated and ill-treated, as certainly on my father's side of the family. And my father was a product of that. He kind of had those qualities in many ways, but he was also brilliant, and he was ambitious as well. And so he wanted to get an education, which my grandfather really didn't believe in. So he went off to college and got a gold medal there, and then went off to grad school in India and got a gold medal there, and then went to Canada to get a PhD in agriculture science. So he was a brilliant scientist. But as a result, I didn't know my father until I was 7 years old, which is when he came back from Canada. And he was this larger than life figure in the world. And for me, certainly as a little child in a village, he seemed almost godlike. Um, my mother, on the other hand, was very simple, very loving, very gentle, not that highly educated, only until the eighth grade, didn't speak English, but just was a pure loving soul. Never, ever got angry at us, didn't raise her voice to me even once in her in 61 years that I had her. So she was the polar opposite. So in a way, she was almost pure feminine energy without any masculine energy. My father was pure masculine energy without any feminine. And what I've learned is that when you don't have a good harmony or blend, then you can end up with sort of the over weighting. If you only have masculine, it becomes the hyper masculine, it becomes the toxic masculine in some ways. And my mother was loving but not empowered. She didn't have personal power. So I had these very, very polar opposite influences. In the first 7 years, when my mother was essentially a single parent to me, even though we were in a joint family setup, but she was the only parent, I was very much like her by birth. So by nature and by nurture, I became more like my mother. I inherited many of her qualities of being peace loving, of being gentle, and so forth. And she also, in a way, parented me to be that. When my father came back into my life, it was again a drastic contrast, and he wanted me to be more like him, and he didn't see a kid who was at all like him, right? So he started to see every one of my qualities as a weakness. I was too trusting, I was too idealistic, I was too peace loving, I was too much intellectually in my head. He wanted me to be the opposite of all of those things. So I developed this inner voice that basically said everything about me is faulty, that I need to be the opposite of who I was. And so that became a real challenge. You can imagine, for anybody, if you're trying to be the opposite of who you are to please somebody else, you kind of lose yourself in the process. So I've learned lately there's a choice that some of us have to make between authenticity and attachment. That you can either be who you are, or you can suppress who you are in order to belong. Right? If you're getting the message that in order to belong, you need to be somebody else or be different. So you suppress your emotions, you don't express yourself, express your anger, and that just mutates in your body and shows up decades later, as in my case, chronic pain. And for many people, it can show up as disease as well. And so that was, I think, one of the things that I've realized about that. So yeah, I grew up with those very, very different influences, both parents. I was like my mother, but I wanted to be like my father, successful in the world, recognized, getting awards and gold medals and recognitions. And yet by nature, I was much more like my mother. So it was always this tug within me. And I kind of rejected that identity of being more like my mother. I was almost ashamed of being that. And finally, it was in that same year, 2018, when the coach that I worked with kind of made sense of that whole dynamic. And she said to me, "Do you realize that you spent 45 years of your life trying to impress your father? And now you spend the last 15 years honoring your mother with your work. That everything you've done in conscious capitalism and all the books that have come subsequently, and even before Forms of Endearment, really starting there, that is a reflection of your mother's energy into the world of business and leadership, where it's missing. And then before that, you were just trying to embody what your father valued, which is power and success and money and status in the world." And so that was a big revelation in a way. It made clear to me what part of my journey is about, is bringing. That's why I wrote that book about the feminine, right? But I
Mm.
also learned over time that I had to experience the worst of the masculine in order to be sensitized to that, the need for more feminine. Right? So it was a combination. I started to look at my life experiences as a gift, even though they were very hard and I wouldn't wish them on anybody else, but they ultimately guided me towards what I was meant to do,
Mhm.
contribution that I'm able to make in the world because of those experiences.
Yes, and you say this in the book, and I very much align with this, Raj. You talk about how, when we really lean into ourselves, that we can see things and do things that only we can do. And you have had a remarkable, it seems like there's an intensity I would describe to the way that you were reared. And you just talked about your parents, but then you also talk about your worldview and experience, the depths and lows of what human beings are capable of was very much intensely informed by being both in India and America. So you also had it there too. So if you could say a little bit about how those experiences colored or you opened your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the gifts of the experiences that I had, and what I'm very grateful to my father for, because when he came back when I was 7, so I had grown up in a little Indian village without running water or electricity, and you can just imagine what it was like there. But then suddenly we are moving across the world. He got a job in Barbados. So I go from a village to suddenly I'm in an airplane and I'm in London watching the changing of the guard, which is literally like my father is now taking over. It's the changing of the guard in my family as well. And then
Mhm.
we're in Barbados in this beautiful sunny paradise there, a completely different world. And so I was 7 to 9 in Barbados, and then my father was a very restless soul, so he got a job in California. And so we moved from Barbados to California near San Francisco, Salinas in Monterey County. And from the age of 9 to 11, we were there. And these were pretty momentous years. So this was 1967 to 69. This was the Vietnam War was raging, the anti-war movement, the hippies, the psychedelic stuff, the political upheavals, Martin Luther King getting shot, Robert Kennedy getting assassinated live on TV. I remember watching that as it was happening, and the riots that were happening at the conventions and all of that. I was just becoming aware of the wider world, and it was a momentous time. And then in 1969, man landing on the moon, right? So you can see all the on the one hand we're murdering leaders, and on the other hand we're doing these extraordinary things. So I could see the extraordinary things that human beings are capable of, both on the ups, on the positive and the negative. And then we go back to India. So I'm almost 12 years old, and suddenly now we're parachuted back into that environment, which hadn't changed that much in those 5 years. And I'm suddenly now looking at and immersed back into that feudal culture which I came from. But now I've got these different eyes because I'm now an outsider here. So I was an outsider in the West, and then I acclimatized, and now I went back to India. Now I kind of had these Western eyes, right? A more modern perspective. And now I'm looking at this feudal culture and what my cousins and uncles and others, how they thought and lived and acted. And it was quite a shock. And I could see things that they couldn't. So one of the early memories that I have is we were living in a city close to our village where my father had his job at a university. And they sent a kid to work in our home as a domestic help, right? Like a servant, they call it in India. And his family had worked for our family in the village for generations. It was one of those kinds of things. And so he was my age, he was 12. And so he came and he was living in our house and working. And at some point, he did something that he wasn't supposed to do. He sat on a chair. He's supposed to sit on the ground, or he picked up a piece of fruit and ate it. And he's not supposed to do that, right? He's supposed to stay confined to his station, right? And I didn't think anything of it. I don't think my mother did, but my cousin in my village found out, and he came to the city specifically to deal with this kid, and he dragged him out of the house, and he took a rope and he tied him with that rope to a tree in the yard, and then he took off his belt and he proceeded to whip him
Mhm.
in public for whatever minor thing he had done. And I was looking at this with horrified, just horrified. And in the moment, I couldn't really say anything. My cousin was much older than me, and I just was, I didn't even know how to react. I was just frozen. But it was a symbolic thing of the culture that I had been immersed back into. So I could see the ills. I could see the caste system, which we were the beneficiaries of, right? We were in one of the upper castes. I could see the the so-called untouchables, who came and cleaned the toilets and did the menial work, and how my aunts wouldn't even look at them, because even to look at them was to get soiled, and then you have to purify yourself. And I could sympathize with the lives of these poor people, and I could see that I was very egalitarian always, and so these things affected me. So again, having it was the gift of that outsider objective lens that I think was part of what I know, why I could notice things that others didn't. And then fast forward a decade, and then I come back to the US at the age of 23 to get a PhD in business. But now I've acclimatized to the Indian culture as well, right, as a young adult. And now I'm looking at the US through somewhat objective eyes. And I'm saying, oh my God, look at how we do business here. And all the manic energy behind the marketing and all the crazy ads and the coupons and the junk mail and and I just started asking, what are we doing and what are we getting for all of this? So I think that gift of objectivity and not drinking the Kool-Aid and looking at things in that way, I think ultimately led me to try to look for a different path forward for business.
Yes, and I think from my perspective as an outsider, knowing you somewhat and having read three of your books, I think that it also, what it did is it just greatly expanded what you could actually see in the world. Most people don't have that kind of purview. So I think that's why you have such an expansive way of thinking about life and what it can be, and business for that matter. So that's how I see it, Raj. Now, if we can, really quick, I can't not presence this for our listeners and viewers. One of the things I've been trying to do in this program, I definitely want to help more men also wound. All of us are walking wounded, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to also help more men, because I think you get more unfairly imprisoned, especially in the emotional realm, than most of us do. I should say than we women do. So I want you to share briefly the story about how when you first got married and you and your wife sat down to watch the movie Ordinary People. What happened there?
Yes, so I had gotten married to somebody that I didn't know that well. I had only known her for about a month, actually, when I proposed to her. And then I write about this in the book. My father reacted so violently to that idea.
Yes.
That he instantly kind of locked me into a position. He said, you must choose between her or us. If you do this, then you're dead to us. And then he tried every possible thing that he could to dissuade me and get me to not do this. But for me, it became a matter of self-respect. And I said, I cannot let my father dictate my life. And when he rejects somebody without even meeting them, I said, yeah, this is my life. I'm not dependent on him. I don't need to. And all my life until then, I had seen that we were so different and our values were so opposite of each other in so many ways. But as a result, I ended up marrying somebody I didn't know that well, and I was completely isolated in the US because my father did cut me off for 5 years, and I got married all alone. And, it was a very difficult time. And so in our first week of living together and being married, and we watched a movie, Ordinary People, which I think won the Oscar a couple of years before that. Very good movie. It's directed by Robert Redford. Incredibly sad movie. And as we're watching, I had tears in my eyes because I've always been quite sensitive, in that sense, and emotional. And my wife looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean? So why are you crying?" I said, "It's the saddest movie I've ever seen." And she said, "Well, I've never seen a man cry. What kind of a man cries?" Right? And so that reaction just shut something down in me. It was the kind of thing maybe my father would have said, or I could have heard, because he saw everything in me as a weakness and not what he wanted. And I had just gone through this huge battle to actually be married to her and give up, be disconnected from my family, etc. And suddenly I'm hearing this, and I didn't have the wisdom or the maturity to actually engage in a conversation about it.
Yeah.
I just felt a sense of shame, and I just shut down, and I said, I cannot show emotion at a subconscious level. I don't know if I consciously made that decision. I said, it's not safe for me here to show any emotion. And so I kind of built a wall around my heart, and I did not allow myself to feel sadness or express that, right? And what I've realized, and I think all of us now know, is that if you can't express or experience the sadness, you also can't experience the joy, right? You basically shut down your ability to experience those emotions. And so after that, I could not cry for any reason whatsoever. Somebody could die and I would not be able to cry, right? I mean, all kinds of things happened the next 20, 25, 30 years. I just couldn't cry. And so, yeah, it was a really significant thing in my life. And it has taken me a long time to get back to be able to be in touch with my own heart and be able to express those emotions.
So tragic. And I know so many of our listeners and viewers can relate to that, which is why I wanted you to share it. So thank you, Raj. Let's grab our last break here. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Raj Sisodia. He's the author of Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. We've been talking more about his background and really what allowed him to be able to render his message and develop it over the years. And after the break, we'll get more into detail as to how it is that he found his way to purpose and ultimately to peace. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break about that my latest book had come out last March of 2023, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you is I created a 3-page assessment for you to be able to download from my Gusto-Now site, and that will allow you to determine the extent to which your operation, your organization are operating at a high level of meaning and purpose. If you are just joining me, my guest is Dr. Raj Sisodia. He's the founding member of the Conscious Capitalism Movement. He is a PHEMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center. He is the co-founder and Chairman Emeritus of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. and the President of Awaken, Inc. So now for this last bit here, Raj, I want to really focus on your path to purpose and peace. And so I want to start with where I first originally met you, which was when you were working, I met you after you'd written the book, but when you were working on Firms of Endearment, the story that you tell in the book about how you were listening, you were gathering stories, and maybe it's good for you to tell that about that. You were gathering stories to try to help find companies that were loved by people, but they didn't spend a lot of money on marketing. And you run across UPS and Christine. And Christine is a ninth grade education. She works at UPS and she says, I'm never leaving. They allowed me to get my GED. They allowed me to go to college. I never want to leave. And you write in your book, which is so beautiful, which is why I wanted to say it right after your story about the ordinary people and stopping your tears, is that you said that was the first instance where you got choked up and you experienced, what would you say, the possibility, the joy of the joy in business or something like that?
Yeah, as I said, it was the first time my heart had been touched in all my years as a business student and then professor. And I realized that there could be such deep humanity within a for-profit business that can exist. And I found many such stories after that. And so that really spoke to me because that's something that I craved without even realizing it explicitly. But I was, Andrew Harvey talks about follow your heartbreak. I had been following my heartbreak for the previous 20, 25 years in my profession. I could see all of the downsides and negative consequences of the way the heedless pursuit of profit at all costs was creating on people, on even the customers that we were selling stuff to, the rise of obesity, using women's bodies to sell products, which leads to eating disorders and body dysmorphia and depression and all the other stuff, the unethical marketing to children and so forth. I could see the downsides and the costs, the real costs of the way we did business. And now I discovered the other side of that. So I was following my heartbreak, and now I discovered my bliss, as Joseph Campbell talks about. Find, discover your bliss. And somewhere between your heartbreak and your bliss, I think, lies your purpose. Those are clues to what
Yes.
really lights you up and what you're meant to do here. Alleviate that suffering and elevate that kind of joy in the world. So from that point on, it was pretty clear to me what my work needed to be about. And that's what led to then the conscious capitalism movement and so forth.
Yes, and it's what I love about the story, Raj, is it's just I always like to say that to me it's akin of you listen to that voice that's trying to tell you what's right for you, what's next for you. You trust, you put your foot on the next right lily pad, and then you can hear the next voice, and the next lily pad presents itself. So the next lily pad for you, after you were writing, after you wrote the Firms of Endearment, get the manuscript, you had the opportunity then to put it in the hands of John Mackey, who was the former CEO of Whole Foods, or at the time he was. And that set off something pretty fantastic. So if you could just say a little bit about meeting John Mackey and then where that led into the conscious capitalism work.
Yeah, so my co-author David Wolf was on a flight before the book was published. It was still a Word document, and he mentioned to the person sitting next to him about the book, and she said, "Oh, my friend John Mackey would love that. Can you send it to me?" He said, "It's not done yet." He said, "No, just send me the Word document." So he did, and she forwarded it to John, and he literally read a 300-page Word document. And then he reached out to us and said, "I read all the business books, and this is the best one I've read in a while, and I completely resonate with this. And I'd love to meet you," and so forth. So I was able to then go to Austin a few months later, several months later, and spend an entire day with John, and got to know him, got a tour of the store, and talked about life. And at the end of the day at dinner, I shared with John my mind map, a vision for what I was calling the Institute for New Capitalism, or INC.
Yeah.
I like to make these acronyms.
Yes,
And
you
he looked
do.
at it. He looked at it and he said, "Oh, that's exactly my vision, but I like the phrase conscious capitalism." And I had never heard that phrase before. And the phrase actually was coined by Mohammed Yunus, the creator of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. But he was using it in a narrower sense to describe what we would today call a social business, which only has society as a stakeholder. But we were using it, or John wanted to use it in a broader sense to describe what I had uncovered through that book, the four pillars: the higher purpose, the stakeholder orientation, the conscious leadership, and a caring culture. So that then we said, okay, let's try to start something in this area. And so a few months later, we had a retreat at his ranch in Austin, near Austin.
Yeah.
And the October of 2008, we had our first conference, and that was the launch of the movement. And it was the most inspiring 3 days of my life, at that point. And yeah, it was the beginning of something quite special. So we just had our 15th CEO conference in Austin, Texas, just a few months ago.
Mm. Of course, that is how I met you, because I serve on the board of Conscious Capitalism here in Dallas, and that's how I met you originally. But for those listeners and viewers, Raj, who don't know what Conscious Capitalism is, can you just give it a bit more of a description?
Yeah, so it is telling a new story of business. It's a new philosophy of business that says that we need to rethink the four fundamentals of business: the why, the what, the who, and the how. And the why was about profit. We say, no, there needs to be a reason why you exist beyond profit. There's something you're trying to do that is meaningful and needed. So there's a higher purpose, just like you write about in your book, Alise, and all of us are now recognizing that we need purpose in our lives as human beings. That's what ultimately gives us the ability to have an impact and leads to deep life satisfaction and so forth. So we need to have a purpose not only for us as individuals, but for our organizations as well. And second is the idea of stakeholders and creating value consciously for all the stakeholders, not just thinking about how much money we can make for the owners. And so consciously creating value for all of them so that we recognize that everybody matters and everybody needs to flourish who's connected with our ecosystem of business. The third is conscious leadership, that we need leaders who are primarily motivated by service to the purpose of the organization and to the people whose lives it touches. And they're not just about power and ego and money. If you get a leader who's about power and ego and money, they're going to be a terrible leader and they will cause a lot of suffering in the world. And yeah, they might make some money, but at the same time, they're going to create a much more harmful effects in the pursuit of that money. And then the fourth is a caring culture. Most cultures are very stressful. We have a lot of very sad statistics, like heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. 120,000 Americans die from stress connected to work every year. 600,000 Chinese die from too much work. I mean, that's the way in which we work in this world, and we sacrifice our well-being and even our lives in that pursuit of profit at all costs. And conscious companies have cultures that are rooted in trust and authenticity and caring, where people can be who they are and they feel genuinely cared for. So when you put those four things together, the research that I did and others have also then supported with their work is that you actually have a much higher performing business. I found that those companies that I had in firms of endearment, 28 companies in all, 18 public and 10 private, they had outperformed the S&P 500 by 9-1 over a 10-year period. So this wasn't a choice between being good for people and the world versus making money. This was saying that the pathway to true profits, not false profits, because many companies make false profits, right? They make money, but they're damaging much more the well-being of people and the environment and the communities. That the pathway to true profit lies through creating value and giving meaning and purpose to everybody.
That's the world that I want to live in, Raj, and that's the one that I'm out trying to help steward as well, thanks to your guidance and tutelage. So we're close to the end of the show here, and I know, one of the things I love about your book that you situate is here you've now really discovered and are now living your purpose through the work that you're doing with conscious capitalism, everything else, but still you didn't have peace. We don't have time to go through how it is that you went to find that too much. So I want to just have you just speak a little bit to, maybe how you found it and what was the end result. But then I want to really showcase the promise of this awaken and staying awake as well to finish the show.
Yeah, so I think to find that peace, we have to first uncover our wounds. We all carry wounds and traumas. Life is hard, and every life we experiences significant trauma. I think it's a universal condition. 13 million Americans have PTSD, but the rest of us have PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, and that's true for humans all over the world. But most of us don't acknowledge that, and certainly we don't do anything to heal from it. We tend to minimize it because we say things like, I didn't get sent to Afghanistan or Iraq, or I wasn't a first responder, or etc. That there are many worse things that happen to other people. So what right do I have to complain about things that may have happened to me? And I think that is a very, very dangerous thing to do, harmful. Just because somebody else has it doesn't mean that your suffering doesn't matter, that you don't have trauma. You do. And unless you acknowledge it, you can never heal it. As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So we have to look at our lives and recognize where we got wounded, where we experienced trauma. And now the great thing about the time we live in is that there are many, many pathways to healing. Many modalities. I have a list of like 24 different things that are available to people, from plant journeys, to compassionate inquiry, to EMDR, to family systems. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can do. So we need to do that. We have to, as we say, most people, they conceal their trauma and then they numb it with drugs and alcohol or other escape mechanisms. But then they wake up and they're still living with it. What we have to do is to reveal it and feel it. Right, and grieve it in order to heal it. And ultimately, if we are able to do that, we can emerge stronger because we had that trauma and we healed it than if we never had the trauma in the first place.
Yes.
You are much stronger because you healed your trauma. It's like, you're the wounded warrior, but you are able to now help other people in a far better way than if you never had the trauma in the first place. So I think that is the gift of trauma, in a sense, if we are able to get to the other side of it and the healing from it, that we become healers. And I think all of us should think of ourselves in that sense as healers. So that's a big part of it, addressing those, acknowledging those wounds, and then learning how to heal them and finding the gift in them. I think that's what leads to inner peace, and that's why we need to get to healing.
That sounds good to me, Raj. That's why we need to get your book in more people's hands across the world. We have run out of time. You are a precious gift to the world, Raj. I really, really admire, respect, and love learning from you and being inspired by you. Thank you very much for coming back on Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much, Alise. I appreciate that. And as I say at the end of the book, is one thing to awaken, another thing to stay awake.
That's
and
right.
I think that's the challenge. We have to, once we have these realizations, we have to live according to them and remind ourselves of these things. Live consciously and live in an awakened state.
Yes, please. listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more, or you want to stay connected to Raj, learn more about his books, what he's doing at Awaken, what he's doing at the University in Monterrey. If you want to learn more there, just go to Raj Sisodia. Let me spell that for you if you don't know how to spell it. It's Raj, R-A-J, Sisodia, S-I-S-O-D-I-A, rajsisodia.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Roger Firestein talking about his book, Solve the Real Problem, because what you think is the problem is usually not the problem. He taught us to think creatively about the problem and find at least 40 different ways to consider it before we ever move to solution. He helped us each to realize that we're far more creative than we tend to believe. Next week, we'll be on the air with Dr. Neha Sangwan, the founder and CEO of Intuitive Intelligence and the author of the new book, Powered by Me, From Burned Out to Fully Charged at Work and in Life. See you there. And remember, work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.